Careful, girl. That apron doesn't make you anybody important. Tanner's voice carried over the counter, loud enough for his camera crew to catch every word. I didn't answer. I wiped the counter slow, steady, the way you do when you've already decided the loud thing won't be you. Bethany, the young waitress, froze near the register, eyes darting between us, unsure if this was one of those moments she was supposed to stay out of. Tanner turned to his camera crew, grinning. This is what real Caldwell looks like, folks. Authentic, unfiltered. He gestured at me like I was part of the scenery. My phone buzzed once against my hip, hidden under the apron. I didn't check it. Not yet. Marcus, my cousin who ran this place, started toward the counter, jaw tight, but Tanner waved him off without even looking at him. Get me a fresh cup, Tanner said, sliding his mug toward me. And do it properly this time. I looked at him steadily and said the only thing I needed to. Of course. For half a second, I saw another version of this same room. 20 years ago, 17 and broke, turned away from that same counter for a meal I couldn't pay for. Back in the present, I poured the coffee without a spill, my hand steadier than his voice had any right to make it. A man 2 booths down quietly lifted his phone, not toward me, but toward Tanner. Tanner turned back to his crew, chest puffed. People like her don't run this town, he said. Never have. The diner went quiet. Even the crew members exchanged a look none of them wanted to be caught making. I set the coffee down in front of him without a word, without a flicker, and turned back to the register. My phone buzzed again, then a third time. 3 messages now, waiting under the apron. I stepped into the back hallway, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I rarely used anymore. Send it tonight, I said quietly into the phone. Then I hung up before anyone could ask who I'd been talking to. Bethany noticed the diner's old security camera above the register, its red light blinking steady, recording everything. Tanner gathered his crew and left laughing, phone already in hand, posting the footage himself, certain it would only help him. Across town, an editor at the Caldwell Tribune opened an email marked urgent, subject line, diner footage, verify before print. People assume a diner apron means you have nothing to lose. They're usually wrong, and I've spent 20 years letting them believe it anyway. I grew up 3 blocks from that counter, in a house where the lights sometimes went out before the bill got paid. My mother cleaned offices downtown. My father drove a delivery route that started before sunrise and ended long after dark. Caldwell wasn't cruel to us exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was indifferent. Nobody in this town ever raised a hand against us. They just never saw us at all. Not really. Not as anything more than the help, the background, the people who kept the machinery running while somebody else's name went on the plaque. I left at 18 with $400 and a library card full of overdue fines. I came back at 39 with something nobody in Caldwell knew I had. Controlling interest in the holding company that had quietly bought the Caldwell Tribune out of bankruptcy 11 years earlier, and a family trust I'd built from 3 small real estate deals into something that now funded half the public projects this town depended on to call itself thriving. I never announced any of it. I didn't buy a house on the hill or a table at the gala. I bought back my cousin Marcus's diner lease when the building owner tried to triple his rent, and I never told him where the money came from. I just started showing up on slow mornings to help behind the counter because I wanted to see, with my own eyes and not through a quarterly report, how this town actually treated the people it didn't think mattered. That's how I ended up standing across the counter from Tanner Whitlock this morning, in an apron instead of a boardroom, watching him decide in 4 seconds exactly what kind of person I was. He wasn't entirely wrong that I didn't look like anybody important. That was the point. I had built an entire life on the difference between how people are treated and how they deserve to be treated, and I had learned a long time ago that you only find that difference by standing exactly where I was standing, unnoticed, unremarkable, and paying very close attention. 20 years ago, a version of me stood outside that same window, hungry, invisible. Today, invisible was a choice. And I was about to remind this town exactly what that choice could cost the people who mistook it for weakness. Nobody at the Tribune knew who really owned the paper. I'd structured it that way on purpose, 3 layers of holding companies deep, with a managing editor named Owen Pierce who answered to a board he'd never once seen in person. Owen was good, sharper than the town gave him credit for, careful with sources, stubborn about facts. He was exactly the kind of person I needed running that newsroom, while I stayed invisible behind it. The Ashby Civic Trust was harder to hide, if you knew where to look, but almost nobody did. It had quietly funded the new library wing, half the youth center's operating budget, and the restoration of the town square gazebo that Mayor Whitlock liked to stand in front of during every single campaign photo. The trust's name appeared on a small brass plaque nobody read. Mine didn't appear anywhere at all. That morning, I'd come into the diner the way I always did on slow Tuesdays, through the back, apron already tied, no different from any other day Marcus needed an extra set of hands. I liked the rhythm of it. Coffee, dishes, the particular honesty people show you when they think you're nobody worth performing for. I hadn't expected a campaign crew. I definitely hadn't expected Tanner Whitlock, phone raised, narrating my own diner like it was a museum exhibit of authentic small-town life, using me as a prop in his father's reelection reel without once asking my name. I'd watched men like Tanner before, men who mistake other people's silence for permission, who've never had to sit with a consequence long enough to learn its shape. What made him useful to me wasn't cruelty. Cruelty is common. What made him useful was that he did it on camera, in a room with a working security system, in front of witnesses who weren't his to control. I didn't need to teach Tanner Whitlock a lesson. I needed him to keep being exactly who he already was, long enough for the room to notice. So I poured his coffee. I said, of course. And I let the ordinary Tuesday keep unfolding exactly the way he expected it to, because the version of this story that would matter hadn't happened in that diner at all. It had happened months earlier, in a spreadsheet, in a trust document, in a signature only I could provide. The confrontation didn't end when Tanner took his coffee. It just changed shape. He lingered by the counter another 10 minutes, narrating for his crew, gesturing at the pie case, at the cracked vinyl booths, at me, like all of it belonged to the same exhibit. This is real America, he kept saying, like he'd invented the phrase. Every time he said it, he glanced at me, expecting something, deference, maybe, or fear. I gave him neither. I gave him nothing at all, which seemed to bother him more than anything I could have said. Marcus stood near the grill the whole time, jaw tight, spatula gripped a little too hard. He'd asked me twice, quietly, if I wanted him to say something. Twice I told him no. Not yet. Bethany kept finding reasons to walk past the counter, refilling napkin dispensers that didn't need refilling, watching Tanner with the particular unease of someone young enough to still believe silence was safer than speaking up, and old enough to already suspect she was wrong about that. Somewhere around the 8-minute mark, a man in booth 6, I'd later learn his name was Ray Delgado, a retired mechanic who'd been coming to that diner longer than I'd been alive, quietly angled his phone toward Tanner instead of his eggs. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just filmed, plate cooling in front of him, the way people do when they've decided they're not going to be the only one who remembers what happened. That was the moment Tanner said it. Loud, easy, performing for a camera that wasn't the one that mattered. People like her don't run this town. Never have. He said it like a fact, like weather, like something so obvious it barely needed saying. The diner went quiet in a way that has a texture to it. Forks stopping midair, the hum of the coffee machine suddenly loud, Bethany's hand frozen on a napkin dispenser. I didn't flinch. I'd heard versions of that sentence my whole life. What was different this time was that I already knew, standing right there in that apron, exactly how wrong it was about to prove itself. This wasn't the first time Tanner Whitlock had said something like that. I knew, because by the time he left the diner that morning, Owen Pierce already had 3 prior incident reports sitting in a folder at the Tribune. A barista in the next county over who'd filed a complaint that quietly disappeared. A campaign volunteer who'd resigned without explanation last spring. a county clerk's assistant who described almost the exact same phrase in a private message to a friend, a message that friend had saved without knowing why. None of those women had the resources to make it matter. None of them owned a newspaper. None of them chaired a trust that funded a third of the mayor's signature projects. I did, and I'd spent the better part of a year quietly gathering what Owen's team had already started digging into on their own, long before I ever set foot behind that counter with an apron on. Tanner's father, Mayor Gregory Whitlock, had built his entire re-election campaign around 2 words: steady leadership. He'd used them on banners, on mailers, on the podium at every town hall. What Gregory Whitlock had never had to reckon with, not once in 16 years in office, was a son whose behavior was steadily becoming a liability nobody in his campaign was willing to name out loud. I'd met men like Gregory before, too. Men who build careers on being unassailable, who surround themselves with people too afraid to tell them the truth. I didn't hate him. I didn't need to. I needed him to understand, clearly and publicly, that the foundation he'd built his re-election on had a crack running straight through it, one his own son had been putting there for years. That morning in the diner wasn't the beginning of anything. It was simply the moment the crack finally showed on camera, in a room with witnesses, in a place I happened to already own without anyone knowing it. Some doors take years to open. This one only needed a single ordinary Tuesday. Bethany found me in the back hallway an hour after Tanner left, wiping her hands on her apron like she needed something to do with them. "I should have said something," she said, "when he was talking to you like that. I didn't know if I was allowed to." I understood the fear underneath that sentence better than she knew. The Whitlock family didn't just run the mayor's office. Old Whitlock money had quietly co-signed the loan on this diner's building 15 years ago, back before Marcus and I bought the lease back. People in this town had learned, slowly and thoroughly, exactly which families you didn't cross if you wanted to keep your job, your lease, your peace. "You don't owe anyone your silence," I told her. "Not for a paycheck. Not for anybody's family name." She looked at me like she wanted to believe that, and also like believing it might cost her something she couldn't afford yet. "What happens now?" she asked. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't tell her about the trust, or the Tribune, or the folder Owen's team had been building for months. I told her the only part that mattered to her that day. "Now somebody writes it down," I said. "Properly, where it can't be quietly forgotten." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that promise away somewhere she could return to it if she needed proof that speaking eventually mattered. I went back out front before the lunch rush started. Marcus caught my eye from the grill, said nothing, understood everything. He'd known me long enough to recognize the particular stillness I get right before I move. My phone buzzed once more in my apron pocket. This time I checked it. Confirmed. Ray's video plus our footage. Draft ready for your signature tonight. I typed back a single word. Send. That night, after the diner closed, I sat at the small desk in the back office with my laptop open and the letter in front of me for the 3rd time. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. 2 paragraphs identifying the pattern of complaints Owen's team had verified. 1 paragraph describing what had happened that morning, with Ray Delgado's video and the diner's own security footage cited as attached evidence. 1 final paragraph, the only one that really mattered. A formal notice that the Ashby Civic Trust was suspending all pending funding commitments tied to the Whitlock administration's current term, effective immediately, pending a full, independent review. Under it, my actual name. Not a holding company. Not an initial. Corinne Ashby, Chair, Ashby Civic Trust. Majority owner, Caldwell Tribune Media Group. I read it twice more before I let myself feel anything about it. This wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, even now, even to myself in an empty office at 11 at night. Revenge would have felt satisfying in a way this didn't. This felt like closing a ledger that had been open far too long. Mine, and every other name in that folder who'd never had the standing to close it themselves. I thought about my mother, cleaning offices downtown until her knees gave out. I thought about the version of me standing outside that diner window at 17, hungry, watching a world that had already decided what she was worth. I thought about Bethany's face in the hallway, asking if she was even allowed to speak. Then I attached the letter to an email addressed to Owen Pierce, subject line simple, for tomorrow's front page. Publish under my name. No more anonymity. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. Somewhere across town, a printing press that I owned and had never once visited in person began preparing to run 12,000 copies with my real name on the front for the first time in 11 years. Mayor Gregory Whitlock watched the diner footage for the first time at his campaign headquarters, replayed twice on a staffer's laptop, his son standing beside him grinning like he expected praise. Good energy, Gregory said, not really looking at the screen. Real. People like that. He didn't ask who the woman behind the counter was. He didn't ask why a security camera in a diner he'd never bothered to visit himself had captured his son so clearly. He was thinking about turnout numbers, about the debate scheduled for Thursday, about the banner reading steady leadership that would hang behind him at tomorrow's rally. His campaign manager, a tired woman named Denise Ford who had quietly flagged 3 prior incidents involving Tanner over the past 2 years, said nothing this time either. She'd learned that raising concerns about Tanner rarely changed anything except her own standing in the room. Tanner clipped the diner footage himself that afternoon and posted it to the campaign's social accounts with the caption, "Meeting real Caldwell voters where they are." It gained traction within hours, not the kind he expected. By 6 that evening, comments had started shifting. A few people recognized the diner. A few recognized Ray Delgado, tagging him directly, asking what he'd actually filmed. Denise noticed the shift first and said nothing to Gregory, because she didn't yet have proof of what was coming, only a feeling she couldn't name. None of them knew that 11 miles away, a printing press was already running. None of them knew the woman behind that counter owned it. Owen Pierce had been the Tribune's managing editor for 6 years without ever meeting the person who actually owned the paper. He'd built a reputation on caution, verify twice, publish once, never run a story he couldn't defend in front of a judge. When the anonymous tip about Tanner Whitlock landed in his inbox 3 months earlier, he'd almost dismissed it as another disgruntled campaign rumor. What made him keep digging was how specific it was. Names, dates, a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. He'd spent weeks quietly corroborating it. A resignation letter here, a deleted social post recovered through a screenshot there, a phone call with a woman in the next county who cried through half of it before she agreed to go on record. By the time the diner incident happened, Owen already had enough for a credible story. What he hadn't had, until 11:47 that night, was a signature willing to put a name behind the trust's funding decision. When the letter came in, he read it twice, then a third time, staring at the name at the bottom. Corinne Ashby. He knew that name. Everyone in Caldwell did, vaguely. The woman who helped out at her cousin's diner sometimes. Unremarkable, easy to overlook. He hadn't known she was also the majority owner signing his own paycheck indirectly for 6 years. He didn't call her. The letter had been clear. Publish it exactly as written. No interviews, no editorializing. Let the document speak. He restructured tomorrow's front page in under 20 minutes, cleared it with legal by midnight, and sent the press's word to hold the run until 4 a.m. for one final version. By sunrise, 12,000 copies would carry Corinne Ashby's real name and real signature for the first time in over a decade, and Caldwell would wake up to a story none of them saw coming. The front page ran under a single headline: Trust Chair, Tribune owner Corinne Ashby suspends civic funding amid pattern of misconduct complaints against mayor's son. Beneath it, my own letter, printed in full. Beneath that, a still frame from the diner's security footage, time-stamped, unmistakable. Beneath that, Ray Delgado's video, transcribed word for word, including the sentence Tanner had said so easily, so publicly, so certain it would cost him nothing. By 7 in the morning, the story had been picked up by 2 regional outlets. By 8, a local radio host was reading portions of the letter on air. By 9, 3 of the trust's other project partners, a hospital foundation, a school renovation fund, a small business grant committee, had issued their own statements confirming they were reviewing their ties to the Whitlock administration in light of the reporting. I read all of it standing behind the diner counter. Same as any other morning. Apron still tied, coffee pot still in my hand. Marcus set a copy of the paper on the counter in front of me without a word, my own name staring back up at both of us in bold 60-point type. Bethany came in for her shift 20 minutes later, saw the paper, saw me, and went very still. "That's you," she said. You own the trust. You own the paper." "I do," I said. "Why didn't you say something yesterday, when he was talking to you like that?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because yesterday wasn't the day for me to say something," I said. "It was the day for the truth to say it instead." Tanner saw the story before his father did, scrolling through it on his phone in the campaign office parking lot, coffee going cold in the cup holder beside him. He read his own quote 3 times, printed in full, attributed correctly, timestamped to the exact minute. He read the words "pattern of complaints" and felt something in his chest go cold in a way 4 years of unbothered confidence hadn't prepared him for. He called his father. Gregory picked up on the first ring, already reading the same story on a tablet Denise had shoved into his hands the moment he walked through the door. "Tell me this isn't real," Tanner said. Gregory didn't answer right away. He was looking at the still frame from the diner's security camera, his son, mid-sentence, the words already public, already permanent, already attached to a name everyone in Caldwell recognized as one of the town's largest civic donors. "Who is she?" Gregory finally asked, though he already knew. Everyone in Caldwell would know within the hour. "She works at a diner," Tanner said, and even as he said it, he heard how thin it sounded. "She owns the diner's building," Denise said quietly from across the room, tablet still in hand. "She owns the paper that just ran this story. She chairs the trust that's funding half your infrastructure promises. She has since before you took office." Nobody in that room said anything for a long moment. Tanner tried to explain himself once more, that it was just a line, just campaign energy, that he hadn't meant anything by it. Nobody was listening anymore. Denise was already drafting a statement she knew wouldn't be enough. Gregory was staring at his own campaign banner through the window, the words "steady leadership" suddenly reading like an accusation. By noon, Owen published a follow-up confirming what half the town had already pieced together on their own. The woman behind the diner counter and the majority owner of the Caldwell Tribune were the same person, and had been for 11 years. The story spread faster than anything Caldwell had produced in a decade. Not because a scandal was rare here. Small towns always have their share, but because nobody could remember the last time someone with this much quiet influence had simply let herself be seen, on her own terms, in the exact place people had underestimated her. A camera crew from the regional news station showed up at the diner that afternoon, asking for a statement. I gave them one sentence, standing behind the same counter Tanner had leaned over the day before. I didn't need anyone to believe I mattered. I needed the record to be honest about what happened. Now it is. That was all I said. It was enough. Ray Delgado came in for his usual lunch that day, and found half the town had already thanked him before I could. He shrugged it off, said he'd just filmed what anyone with eyes and a working phone should have. Bethany worked her shift with a different kind of steadiness than the day before, quieter, more certain, like she'd learned something about speaking that she wouldn't unlearn. Tanner tried, publicly, to apologize. A short statement, carefully worded by someone who clearly wasn't him, expressing regret for any words that may have been misinterpreted. Nobody accepted it, because nobody had misinterpreted anything. Every word of it was on video, twice, from 2 separate cameras, and none of it needed interpreting at all. Within 48 hours, 3 more of the Trust's project partners formally suspended their agreements with the Whitlock administration, citing the same reporting. A regional business alliance that had scheduled a photo op with Mayor Whitlock quietly canceled it. 2 of his largest individual donors withdrew their support in public statements, both mentioning the diner incident by name. Denise Ford resigned from the campaign the following Monday, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she'd spent 2 years quietly flagging concerns about Tanner that had gone nowhere, and she was done being the only person in that building who remembered it. The county's ethics review board opened a formal inquiry into whether campaign resources, staff time, official vehicles, a permit for the diner filming, had been improperly used in connection with the incident. It was a narrow question on paper. In practice, it meant the campaign's finances, schedules, and internal communications were now subject to review by people outside the family's control for the first time in 16 years. Gregory Whitlock announced his withdrawal from the mayoral race 9 days later, in a short statement that didn't mention his son by name and didn't need to. Everyone in Caldwell already knew. Tanner lost his campaign position immediately, quietly, without a press release. He kept a low profile after that. I heard, secondhand, that he'd left the state to stay with relatives, though I never confirmed it and never asked. None of it had required a raised voice from me. Not once. Just one letter, sent at 11:47 on an ordinary Tuesday night, built out of a decade of paying close attention. The Ethics Review Board's final report came out 6 weeks later, longer than anyone expected, thorough in a way that surprised even Owen. It confirmed the pattern documented in the Tribune's original story, cited the diner's security footage and Ray Delgado's video as key evidence, and recommended that any future campaign involving the Whitlock family undergo independent financial and conduct review before certification. It wasn't a criminal case. Nobody went to prison. That was never what this was about, and I want to be honest about that, even now. What it was about was a record, an official, permanent, undeniable record that the pattern had existed, that it had been reported when it happened, and that consequences had followed, exactly the way they're supposed to when the systems meant to catch this kind of thing are finally allowed to work. The trust resumed its civic funding under a new administration 8 months later, with updated oversight requirements written directly into every future agreement. Requirements that hadn't existed before, and that I made sure would outlast me personally, so no future chair would need a diner incident to enforce them. I stayed on at the diner some mornings, same as always, apron and all. People treated me differently now, which took some adjusting to. Bethany asked me once if I missed the anonymity. Sometimes, I told her honestly. But I didn't build any of this to stay hidden forever. I built it so that when the moment came, the truth would already have everything it needed. Ray Delgado still comes in every morning for the same booth, the same eggs, though now he waves at me on his way and instead of just nodding. Bethany's different too, quicker to speak up, quicker to notice the small unfairnesses that used to slide past her unnoticed. She told me last week she'd started keeping a notebook, just in case, the way I once had, decades before I had the standing to do anything with what I wrote down. Marcus never says much about any of it directly. He just makes sure my coffee's ready before I ask for it now, a small correction to a morning that once required none. The town changed in smaller ways too. A few people who'd have looked past a woman in a diner apron 6 months ago now stopped to say good morning properly, meet my eyes, ask my name before assuming they already knew everything about me. I don't think most of them fully understand why. I've never explained it to anyone who didn't already need to know. What I've come to believe, standing behind that same counter I once stood outside of as a hungry 17-year-old, is that dignity was never something Tanner Whitlock, or anyone like him, had the power to take from me in the first place. He could only ever reveal whether he had any of his own. He didn't. The record made sure everyone would remember that clearly, long after his family's name stopped meaning anything in this town. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting as long as I did before I let the truth speak for itself. I never do. Waiting wasn't weakness. It was patience with a purpose. The same patience my mother had scrubbing office floors long after the lights should have made her tired. The same patience my father had driving that route before sunrise every single day of my childhood, without once raising his voice about how unfair it was. I learned dignity from people who never got to see it recognized publicly. I made sure, when my own turn came, that it would be. Tanner Whitlock thought he was talking to a woman with nothing to protect and nothing to lose. He wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't need protecting. I'd spent 20 years making sure of that. But he learned, the hard way, that quiet isn't the same thing as powerless, and that the people you overlook are often the ones who've been watching the longest. I still work behind that counter some mornings. I still wear the same apron. The only thing that changed is that now, when someone looks at me, they look a little longer before they decide what they think they know. That's really all any of us ever asked for, in the end. Not applause. Not an apology dressed up in careful language. Just enough attention, for long enough, that the truth finally had room to stand on its own. Some letters take a decade to write. This one only took a night, because the truth had already been waiting, patiently, for someone willing to sign it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next dramatic story. Tap like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching.